Hi, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Said Differently. I'm your host, Jennifer. This is sponsored by Troupe, but it is the show where we really focus in on B2B go-to-market storytelling and messaging and all the good stuff that surrounds that. I'm really excited to have today's guest with us, Constantine Limberakis from Liberis Consulting. They are a partner of ours. Before we introduce Constantine, let me get into teasing the topic for today, which is why it's so doggone important to have expertise and domain knowledge embedded in the marketing team as you develop your whole go-to-market strategy and your storytelling to the market. It sounds kind of obvious, but it's surprising what a huge difference that makes and what that evolution looks like for companies. So Constantine and I have known each other for quite a while, but let him introduce all of you to him. So some of
Oh
your
yeah.
background, please.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, it's been a while that we've known each other. We've kind of seen the evolution of different industries like procurement and sourcing and the whole B2B space.
Yeah.
I come to the world of product marketing overall kind of by way of consulting and also as an analyst in the industry. And so by way of all these different experiences, I kind of set the tone for foundationally of what we're trying to do at Liberis, which is, helping those companies that need that expertise to say, look, we need to go deeper into truly understanding what it is we're trying to say and understand all those nuances of what the market is and how that's changing. So having that domain expertise is something we found always to be very important in making sure you're spot on with what you're trying to say.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. I mean, you guys certainly really understand and get the supply chain procurement arena and kind of go deep there. And whereas some other consulting firms kind of keep it a little more broad on the product marketing side, but you guys really bring that domain knowledge in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's interesting as part of this, one of the things that we find is oftentimes within product marketing in general is that foundationally, it's interesting to see where people come from to
Hmm.
help fill in that role. And I think that often sets the stage for where that expertise is because they've found playing different roles where they've often seen where their knowledge can help improve what's going on within the go-to-market effort. So we could talk a little bit more about that as part of why that's important.
Yeah, and we did some prep for this call, and I have my notes here, and I'm
Yes.
looking at them. And we wanted to start our conversation really talking about the common challenge that you and I have both encountered in joining marketing teams, which is, there's the scenario where nobody in marketing really understands the solution category or the buyer personas, maybe at a really superficial level, but not in a real
Mhm.
meaningful level. And you're trying to sell to these folks and you're trying to sell in this category. And a great product marketer, I think, one who's been around the block, so to say, knows how to really acquire a lot of that knowledge. They have a methodology for getting there. But when you've come in the past, like as I have, and you see, okay, you have a really marketing generalist team, you have several marketing generalists, and yes, they might know their specific marketing function, like demand generation or events planning, but they don't really understand the space. Like,
Mhm.
what's been your experience? How often have you encountered that, and what do you typically see there?
I've encountered it more often than I'd like to say, and I think part of it is simply just by the function itself and what goes into the expectation. And one thing I often like to say, and this is just one of my mantras, is that the core root of the word marketing,
Yes.
the market. You've got to understand what that is. So marketing then often is seen as a function of getting things out there, getting the word out there, getting, our message out there, getting all the different mechanisms of doing that messaging. It's
Yeah.
making sure we have the ebook and we can do the social media and
Yeah.
all these elements that of what a marketing function and what marketing is expected to do. But without that foundation of saying, well, what is it really that this solution was designed for? What is it that we're really trying to solve for? And understand what that competitive landscape looks like. When you put all those things together and have that proper functioning,
Hmm.
then all those outlets where the marketing team can go can do it easier because then they truly understand that dynamic. And I think
Totally. Yeah,
that's where it falls apart. It's
it
you
does.
get caught up on the output, but you're not focused on really the dynamic
Yeah,
of
and
what the
so,
market is.
and a common symptom of that is you have way too many like iteration cycles just to get a piece of content out the door because it has to
Mhm.
go through other channels within the organization in order to be kind of get that approval to leave the door with credibility. And I know one of like, so how did we get here? One of the situations I've certainly seen time and time again is that this is, an early stage company. A lot of that domain expertise is embedded with the founding team, right? And
Mhm.
and they or you and or you may hire people in other parts of the organization, such as product or in your services side that have that. But yet marketing is sort of an afterthought of getting that domain
Yeah.
expertise within the marketing organization itself. It's like, well, just call on so and so in product or so and so in services, but
Yeah.
you don't have anybody in marketing. Like how do you think we get there? Like certainly you've seen that situation.
Yeah, I think it all depends on how you got to where you're at with the solution. And one example from one experience that I had was there was an acquisition of a company that was in source to pay that, and they were more focused on order to cash. And then all of a sudden they brought in all this new technology and they knew that was the right strategy to bring in. But then all of a sudden the marketing team that had been doing all this all the time was like, well, what do we mean by procurement? What do you mean by sourcing?
Mm.
And the foundation really wasn't there for them to truly understand, well, how do we bring this all together? So a lot of times it's just because strategically a company decides to acquire somebody and all of a sudden there's new knowledge that's required. And it isn't any fault of the marketing team. It's just because they weren't exposed to it. That could be one output or one challenge. But the one you were talking about before is often more because of that startup had a very focused, very intentional purpose of being their MO. The
Yep.
founder now is all of a sudden running around trying to
Yeah,
talk to everybody to raise money.
that's
And
right.
then the marketing team is like, oh, wait a minute, we need our founder to come in and help us finish this off. So then you have that gap.
There's
And
a
that's
big scale problem there, right?
yes,
There's only so many hours in a day. And
yes.
another situation I've seen, I'm going to actually use clay as an example of
Okay.
this, is where you could start off as a more generic solution, right? The history of clay is or you could think of like Monday or these project management tools or something where their expertise in a specific domain isn't necessarily needed because their tools are a little more horizontal, right? But then if you
Hmm.
start to go after a very specific segment, right? Clay started going after the sort of sales outreach side and sales prospecting side. Now you need to bring in somebody who really understands that domain if you're moving
Yeah.
from horizontal to more vertical.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's where then you see people coming in and they often say, I never thought I would be in product marketing, but I kind of fell into it
Yeah.
because of that. So we'll see the situation with practitioners that were on the other side saying, where I'm coming in because I know what's needed to get that done. Other times it's people from product. Other times it's people from sales or people that have been like myself that have been analysts in this space that said, kind of came into it to say, I can help these companies better talk to that because this is how these industries are evolving, or this is what, the zeitgeist is, and how do you need to make sure that your message is spot on with what's going on there. So those are just different things I've seen.
Yeah.
And that's where those different places of where that domain expertise can kind of play front and center because you have a different perspective.
Yes. Let me add a wrinkle. So I think it's more than just having the domain expertise. If you're going to be a strong product marketer, you need to know what to do with that domain expertise, right?
Yes.
So I recall working at Combined Net. I'll name them by name because they don't
Yeah.
exist anymore. They got gobbled up by SideQuest, which is now
Yeah.
Jagger.
Which is now
Um,
Jagger. Yeah.
and we brought in a fantastic domain expert. His name was Brett. I'm not going to drop his last name, but he had been a former chief procurement officer. And so now we were able to tap this person who had really been in that role, right? They've been in seat as the buyer persona, the key decision maker. But it wasn't just enough to be able to tap into his brain. You needed to be able to know what to do with that as a product marketer.
Yeah.
So that's certainly something you guys know and live and
Yeah.
breathe at Liberis, right? Is like you,
Yeah.
it's the knowledge, but now how do you turn that into a go-to-market strategy?
Right. And what I always like to look at is the word is how do you evangelize that in terms of the outside, but also inside. Everybody's got to be on the same page. We got to all understand what where it is that we're trying to do. And I think part of that then is requiring that knowledge to get disseminated in different formats. It's internal training. So in the example that I gave, if we're just going to name drop, it was me coming back on board to determine when CoreCentric acquired that company, right?
Mm.
So I had to go into their headquarters and teach these folks that knew order to cash and other accounts payable, but never had really had a chance to sit down and have somebody explain to them, well, what do you mean by source to pay? What do you mean by sourcing? What do you mean by procurement? What do you mean by
Yeah.
contract management? Where does that all sit in? And taking that knowledge and breaking it down, because then if you understand the function of what that solution's trying to manage and understand the fundamentals, then people start ideating. They're like, well, what
Yeah,
if we do it this way? And what do we say it that way? But without that fundamental, then it
you're right.
just becomes like a word salad for these people. And this is where you then get the AI, blah, 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 and everything just sounds the same. But then there's nothing unique in there that someone said, aha, this is why this thing was created in the first place. Maybe if we said it this way, then you can change it up. But if you don't have the fundamentals that, and
Yeah.
it's no fault, again, often of the marketing team, it's because they were never trained in it properly or never brought on board properly to understand not just the technology, but understand what the function is that this technology is being used for.
I love that. So said differently, Constantine, it's like you have to take that and once you really kind of embed and get that deeper understanding of who you're talking to, you always want to try to make your messaging, I don't want, conversational. Like you said, you don't want it to
Mhm.
be garbledy-gook. But it
Yeah.
has to be a conversation that uses language and words that the persona that you're targeting understands and that they use, right? And that they
Yes.
care about. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and it has to be real enough so that's not transparent because then they'll see that, right? They'll
Mhm.
see, okay, this is just whatever, and they don't feel like they have a connection to it because they might recognize that the person that they're talking to
Yeah.
is doesn't know their pain. Like, it goes back to that. So, it's the yearning for having it's the idea of not just sympathy,
Yeah.
but empathy. And when you have the empathetic, if that's the word, yeah,
I'll
empathy,
take it. I'll accept
empathetic, yeah, yeah.
that.
If you have that as part of the conversation, whether it's live or it's whether it's something you're saying, people are going to gravitate to that because they're going to know it's genuine. And I
Yeah.
think that's something that can get lost with a lot of the automated AI.
Mm.
It just starts all sounding the same.
Yeah.
And then, you can get that all out there. But when you have that real conversation and then they see what you're saying, they're like, yeah, this makes sense to me. I think you guys can help us. Right.
Terrific.
That's the human element that I don't think the AI is going to be able to
It's
replace.
true. It's true. All right. So getting back, keeping with the human element,
Yes.
how do we close this gap, right? So if you are missing that domain knowledge within the marketing team,
Hmm.
um, yes, you might have a few people on staff. The founders are there to tap it. As we said, they get maxed out, they get harder to reach. It doesn't scale. They also don't look and think about those things through a marketing lens. So how do you get that knowledge within marketing? Certainly one easy path would be to engage somebody like Liberis if you're in procurement
Yes.
and supply chain, right? I'll plug
Sure.
you guys a little bit, but you're a
Nice.
quick accelerated path to get there. But let's put that aside for a minute. What are some specific tactics and strategies you've used and you've deployed to either close your own gap on domain knowledge or to recommend to companies how they can do this for the marketing function? What are the steps to get there?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of different levers you can pull.
Yeah.
And I think it kind of goes back to then getting people excited as part of, say, go to market. So we're right here in the end of 25, and you're going to go into 26 to say, well, what is it that we want to say and how do we want to do it? Well, one of the levers I've always used is just really taking advantage of all the education that's out there, right?
Yeah.
Going on to the LinkedIn Learning, going on and getting your company to sponsor. I think one of the most profound classes that I ever did, it was a 6-week course with MIT that talked about the AI implications for business, right?
Okay.
Having those foundations to understand, like someone says, what's the difference and kind of like a common way of what's the difference between machine learning and agentic AI and generative AI and understanding those core foundations. Having that allows you then to more easily take that and put some marketing spin on it. And it goes back to that foundation. Like if you have somebody teaching you, you learn and then you interpret it yourself, and then you're able to put it in your own words. And I think that's foundational. So getting that
Yes.
training, taking those classes, learning up as much, but also, I think also understanding the customer, knowing what foundationally you've already done.
Yeah.
Go back, look at what the key things are that they're saying about what you're doing. Go through those case studies. And if they're not there, try to talk to customer success. And I think this is where marketing needs to partner with other parts of the organization through product marketing, which is again
Yes.
the ability to broker, because
Yes.
that's where conversations kind of end up like, oh, that's just marketing. I can't tell you how many times I've been at a different company. One of the last places I was like the head of sales enablement was saying, "Oh, that's just marketing." I'm like, "Well, hold
Hmm.
on a second. We're all on the same
That's
page,
right. Right.
and we might have different functions in terms of funnel of or early funnel
Yeah.
or late, but that should be consistent, whether
Yeah.
it's you're trying to tell somebody what the problem is or validating their problem, or trying to convince somebody of why you're solving that problem better than somebody else
Right.
or not
Right.
doing anything at all.
Right.
So no, so
I
that
love
train
those examples. I love the continuing education aspect of it and just stay curious. I
yes,
also, the customer side, if you have access to, gosh, Constantine, you and I can remember back before their call recorders existed, right?
yes,
You'd sit in on sales calls and you still should, right? I mean, that's
yes.
a very valuable thing. You can either listen to the recordings now, glimpse through the transcripts. I would still recommend listening to the audio because you get the sort of human color aspect
Hmm.
rather than just reading a dry transcript, but either of them are acceptable. I love customer advisory boards and getting those
Yes.
pulled together so you have like sort of regular touch points with the not look, let's be honest, not every customer is created equal, and some customers have better feedback and you might weight some of their thoughts more than others. Getting out to shows, industry events, talk about high traffic, high volume, like get in the thick of it, right? Like
Yeah.
marketing needs to get out there. They have to
Yeah.
put themselves out there. So,
I think another way to do it also is to look at your customers, and this is just foundational stuff that looking at what your customers are, and if they're publicly traded or if there's info out there, go look at their 10Q, go look
yes.
at their filings, go
Yeah.
look at what their executives are saying and where then your technology plays
Right.
into.
What are their priorities? What are they? Yeah,
Right.
that's right.
The other nuances, and I think we were going to talk about this. I hope, tell me if I'm not getting ahead of
Go
myself,
for
is
it.
the
It was next on the
geography.
list. Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
the geography one?
Hmm.
Right. So that's also classic, and particularly where you've got marketing teams exposed to different places just regionally. And it
Yeah.
depends on how marketing go to market. Are they decentralized? Are they centralized? However that's set up. But because of the nuances of markets being different in different places because of regulation, different country requirements, whatever that is, or even just geography and
Yes,
concern over the geopolitics of that,
totally.
those all have impacts, right? Um, in the classic example, and I was dealing with supply chain risk and I was working at Risk Methods. One of the things that we are always often looking at is what regulation is being pushed out by the EU
Absolutely.
versus the
Huge.
US. And it's like, well, some things we just don't care about the Lieferketten Sorgfaltspflichtengesetz, the
Yeah,
German supply chain law in the US as much as they did in the DACH region where we
that's
were
right.
focused
Right.
because of, that regional requirement.
That's right.
And then it becomes supranational if the EU is involved. But then, okay, there's reasons why we might be interested. But then when you're talking to your customer, part of the challenge then is that all the material they have might be focused on that because you're sitting here in the US. But then how do you make sure you broker what is material and what's not material to your
That's
customer in a
you're
particular region,
100% right. Right. There could
right?
be a bigger, like a different hook, if you will, to shorthand this whole thing. There could be a different hook in doc, in, parts of the EU that is going to accelerate that conversation, that top of funnel movement faster, or that even that inbound, more so than in the US. And actually, I was actually just talking with a PR agency that I've worked with many times in the supply chain space, just a couple days ago, and they were talking about how, look, and I'm not trying to bring politics into this conversation, but the reality is like DEI has changed here in the US. So things around supplier diversity and things like that has changed quite a bit in the
Right.
past year in terms of prioritization. So all of those things need to be considered as well.
Yeah. And that's just the zeitgeist or the German word is zeitgeist, but anyway, we'll say use the US or the American way of saying it. But the point is that that's kind of what's going on, right? Every change
Yeah.
is always there, change is constant,
Yeah.
and there's always movements back and forth politically, economically, and these shifts in these changes will have an immediate impact on how your clients are going to want to buy your solution. So being in tune with that will help you then know how to adjust. And
Mhm.
of course, classic examples now tariffs. Okay, everyone wants to talk about tariffs. And all of a sudden you see all these webinars on tariffs because
That's
now
right.
we're all
Yeah.
tariff experts. But there's something that needs to be genuine about that to say we understand, for instance, that this is a problem. We've adjusted our technology or accommodating our customers or whatever to be able to understand those nuances and be able to use that as these things shift. So
Yes.
not always saying that we know everything about it, but knowing that you're adjusting with what the needs are. And that goes back into understanding the function that your solution is catering to.
I love that point because it's really important. And this is where, again, that domain knowledge is going to really help make sure this is true. There has to be real substance behind it, right? You
Mhm.
can't just be like, well, everybody's talking about XYZ, so we need to make sure that's part of our messaging. Well, it can't be shallow, it can't be superficial. There has to be
Right,
a real connection there. Otherwise, your credibility, people are going to eventually figure out if they peel back one layer of the onion, they're going to be like, well, there's really not much
right,
years.
right. So be prepared for two or three layers because someone's going to test you, right?
Yeah.
And it just all goes back to that, I think, that discipline
Yeah.
of understanding and having that interest in about what you're promoting,
Yeah.
right? And marketing is as has been around for ages. It's not just what we think of marketing today. When you see a symbol, when you see a logo, when you see whatever, that's all marketing. So
Yeah.
there's something behind it. And if you could validate why that exists and what you're meant to do to help solve those challenges, that goes back into then building that trust that then can continue to expound on itself. But again, having that true knowledge, I think, is something that I don't know it's taught as often in marketing when you're learning about all those other things, which are just as important. Because once you get one thing down, then you got to know all the channels to be able to send that message out. Well,
Yes.
that's just as important to and go back and measure like with what Troupe does, right? To
Yeah.
go back and validate. what it is we just came up with. But those are all elements that are important as
No,
part
you're
of it.
right. And that's a good note to close on. I think, part of when we kicked off this conversation talking about why this domain knowledge is so important, marketing has to bring the credibility within the organization, right? If
Mhm.
everybody looks at marketing and says, well, they don't really understand our market. You have to be able to go I don't want to say this in an animosity way, but toe to
Right.
toe with sales, that you have to have that within your own organization in marketing. But you also have to be able to measure the effectiveness of what you're doing. And so if you're looking to tell a go-to-market story and a message to the market, you have to be able to put some real measurement behind whether that's working
Mhm.
or not. Otherwise, it's just feelings and opinion, and it's easy for people to sort of question that. So,
Right. Yeah. It's always that, it's the anecdotal, it's that constant challenge. And I think that's where that distrust comes in, is because everyone's got a different MO, right? Marketing's trying to create content to show we got more leads in the funnel. Sales is trying to say, I've closed more deals, and bringing that together. Well, you have a common thing. We have a solution we're trying to sell, or services we're trying to sell, and we all have to be on the same page as to how that evolves, but know what's working and what's not,
that's
right?
right.
And that's what you need to be able to measure. And I think that traditionally has always been that challenge, because there's no, you weren't looking at the same thing the same way. It's the analogy I always like to use is the story with the blind man and the elephant.
Okay.
Everyone says, well, what's an elephant? Everyone has a different opinion of what the elephant is because they're blind. Well, because they're not looking at it from someone else's point of
Yeah.
view. So
Yeah.
that's I think
Well,
important.
and certainly the great unifier over all of that is everybody is telling a story, right? And
Mhm.
so what is the expertise behind that story? And
Yes.
so it as you've mentioned in this conversation, it has to really connect with the buyer. It has to have that credibility and yeah, awesome. So anyway, it was great to talk to you, Constantine, about this. I'm hopeful that, folks will look at Liberis if they're in need of some rapid acceleration of that domain knowledge, or even maybe you have it internally, but you now been, breathing your own oxygen for too long. This happens too, and you need a fresh perspective and set of eyes on
Yeah.
it, right? So
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's all those different nuances. And again, either whether you're early stage and you're looking for that kind of person to help with the founder, or it's you've gone through a whole transition and you're seeing a new evolution and you need some guidance to say, well, we want an objective point of view, right?
awesome. Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you for being here. I appreciate your time, and
Yes.
we'll see y'all on the next episode. Bye.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you for having me.